Hello, this is the RPG Crawler, and it's once again into the fray to review a product. This time we're delving into the old school revival. This is not a retro clone, however, but rather one of those products that manages to deliver its own new system while mimicking the feel of old school gameplay. I speak, of course, of Goodman Games' Dungeon Crawl Classics. This one's actually been on my wish list for some time. I had the opportunity to review a bit of it when it first came out back in 2012, there and abouts. However, I recently went ahead and got it, a hard copy of it, and managed to give it a thorough read-through and ran a few games with it. So now I feel a bit more confident actually examining it in detail. First, however, a little bit of background. Dungeon Crawl Classics was originally a module series developed by Goodman Games for the Dungeons & Dragons 3rd and 3.5 editions, bringing together a series of adventures, many of which were standalone, which had the sort of feel and challenge of old-school D&D style adventures, but in a modern system. When the 4th edition came out, they continued to produce these adventures in the new version, but 4th edition's gaming license was more restrictive, and although I am, of course, not privy to the inner workings of the line, it seemed that the series kind of sputtered to a halt around 4th edition, after which Goodman Games turned to producing their own RPG system. DCC RPG is the result of that. While it uses some core elements of the D20 system, it has been stripped down to a great degree and has had its own customizations added onto it. Most of the rules rely more on GM interpretation than hard and fast in the book rules, and a lot of the content in this book that seems like hard rules is actually just presented in a manner of sampling, just samples given for the DM to develop their own thing from, that should be changed for the particular game world involved. That having been said, there's still a lot to talk about, and I'll no doubt end up breezing over quite a bit of the contents even then. So let's go ahead and get down to business. First of all, the physical book is a real tome. I'll be basing my look at the hardcover 4th printing here. They actually have soft covers available, and I believe as of this recording they're actually producing another printing of the soft cover, but don't quote me on that. This one hardcover book holds all of the core rules that you should need for the game, and clocks in at over 475 pages, plus a few pages of credits and ads, and a foldout with various table cheat sheets so you can refer to them as a sort of screen. And I can unfold it for you real quick to show you in the back of the book. Oh my god. Anyway, yeah, you've got a fold out table there, and since I haven't actually folded out, it was a little bit difficult. I will go ahead and cut that down so you can view it. Anyway, I actually picked up my copy of this from Amazon, but it should also be available from the Goodman Games game site. I will link both in the description below. You know, I've talked about how some books had really decent build quality in the past, but this one really showed me what I should be expecting of a hardcover just from the way it's put together. It's got a very nice lay-flat style spine. It's got 2 ribbon bookmarks, and the interior pages are mostly black and white with a few full color spreads near the covers. It's not glossed on the interior, but the paperweight seems heavier than I've come to expect from RPG books. That might just be me. And it really does seem made to last. Maybe not made to last prettily, but I feel like it'll put up more of a durable fight against wear and tear and use than some of the books which I now refer to a lot. Speaking of the interior, though, normally I do evaluations of the artwork towards the end, but the interior art is so intrinsic to this book and its overall presentation that it needs to be mentioned right up front. It consists of a full range between full-page illustrations and smaller images, sometimes intertwined with or presenting the actual content as part of the image. For instance, this one, where there's images throughout the standard images on both sides, but then you get images that just wind throughout the content, such as this, where you have entire sections of the content as little labels within the image itself. I really, really like this. I really, really do. It does It does make it somewhat difficult to navigate in some circumstances because pages with images on them don't bear page numbers. However, it just lends it so much atmosphere. The images include work of some of the classic fantasy artists out there, and very much feels like an extravagant collection of everything you might have seen in old books from the 70s and early 80s, mixed up with some almost like weird tale-style comic book stuff and cover art from the classic Sword and Sorcery era before RPGs even existed. I will say that, in my opinion, the system itself wouldn't have the same impact without the artwork included. It is critical to this thing. In terms of contents, the book contains about 9 chapters with 8 appendices and 2 example adventures at the end, many of which vary widely in size. The example adventures are pretty critical to somebody who's not used to the system, since so much of the system is open to GM interpretation and customization, so it gives you that sort of idea of how to build things, but I'll talk more on that later. Chapter 1 covers character creation and classes, and introduces a number of elements that are necessary to fully understand this system and its differences from other D20 derived ones. Before I get into all of that, it stands to note that this system doesn't just rely on the usual set of polyhedral dice, common to most role-playing games, but also requires the use of Xochi dice. These are dice with non-standard numbers of sides, and indeed some physically dubious side combinations. I have some right here that I purchased just to run this game, and you've got these things out there such as the D3, which is basically a D6 that's been relabeled. You've got the D5, which is a very strange triangular one that will roll and roll well to produce a number between 1 and 5. You've got the D7, which don't even ask me how to describe. You've got the D14, the D16, the D24, and the D30, with the D14 looking very much like a D12, and the others being variations of a D20, and I just dropped one. Oh well. Professionalism. Anyway, what this all functions as is, not only does it have variations for different table styles and different additions to the rules, such as the D dice that warriors get, and tables with 30 entries or 24 entries, but the entire system includes something called the dice chain, which includes the usual polyhedral dice plus these in a chain all the way up and down. Certain aspects can bump up a die that you're rolling up or down the die chain. For instance, if you ordinarily roll a D8 for something, but something bumps you up one die in the chain, then you'd roll a D10. If it bumps you down, then you'd roll a D7. And it just continues onward from D3 all the way up to D30 on either side. So once you're past that oddity and you've got an understanding that you'll need more than just the usual number of die, the character creation system itself has a few modifications from the usual D20 systems that really sets it apart. First of all, in the base rules, you don't make a single level 1 character, but rather 3 or 4 level 0 characters based on the size of your adventuring group that are the peasants and commoners of a town. Thus, the first adventure is actually a character funnel, where all of these characters go in, and this can mean a dozen or more if you've got a very full group. And then whoever survives and comes out on the other side is now your character. And it's just like a brutal meat grinder kind of thing. And it's really, really fun until you've done it several times, and then it kind of wears out its welcome. But hopefully that will not be an issue, even with the constant turnover of characters, unless you're playing this thing all the time. Next to note is a change in the ability score layout. Rather than the classic 6, you have strength, agility, stamina, personality, intelligence, and luck. Luck plays a pretty crucial part in this game, not only by applying its bonus or penalty to certain actions based on your class, but also to a randomly generated situation chosen at character creation. Luck can also be burned during the game to attempt to modify certain roles and save your character's life, Certain classes get luck back naturally, but most have to rely on playing their alignment well and letting the DM decide whether they recover their luck or not. Other than that, things are pretty straightforward and match a lot of normal D20 stuff. Saving throws are the classic 3 from the D20 systems. You've got fortitude saves, reflex saves, and willpower. The alignment system only has the single axis between lawful and chaotic, with neutral in between, of course. Characters generally start extremely poor with only a few coppers to their name, and level advancement is capped at level 10, giving the entire game a very low-level feel. In fact, characters above level 5 are extremely difficult to advance to. Most characters retire about level 5. The XP system merits a special mention, since rather than scaling purely to the difficulty of the encounter, it takes into account participation as well as difficulty, etc., and it produces an XP value of a particular encounter between 0 and 4. You don't get experience for various creatures depending on, they don't have a set number of experience. Every encounter is going to give you either 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4 experience. And so later, when you need hundreds of experience to advance, it does slow down considerably. Classes in DCC RPG are interesting to say the least, at least for me. They're comprised of the classic 4, Cleric, Warrior, Thief, and Wizard, but also include a Halfling, Dwarf, and Elf as their own classes. While vaguely based on the classic D20 style of classes, every class in this one includes a number of specialized abilities that really set it apart. For instance, instead of using a base attack bonus for like the other classes, warriors in DCC RPG use a deed die, which not only makes for a larger range of potential attack bonuses, but may also be used to execute specialized feats on each attack. Other classes have their own peculiar abilities. Each class gets its own crit table, action dice, and titles as well. The skill system in Chapter 2 is like 2 pages, with a basic description of difficulty levels and guidance on when you can make a check or not, but no overall list of skills. So that leaves a whole lot to GM interpretation. Chapter 3, Equipment, is a few pages longer, but not by much. It included charts of the basic gear and costs, as well as a table for starting wealth for higher level characters, just in case you need to create a new one further down the line. Chapter 4 is the combat system, and it's actually pretty large. Not only because of the specifics covered regarding combat and so forth, but because of the included tables. It covers the basics that you'd expect of encounter, initiative, movement, and so forth, most of which are fairly simple, but also includes what each class can or cannot do with each action, modifiers to attack rolls and armor class based on the circumstances, which just boils down to your usual single table. But the real gem for this particular chapter are the fumble and critical systems. The fumbles occur when a character rolls a 1, while crits occur on a 20 or lower depending on the class. Fumbles can have a variety of effects, and the severity is actually tied to the armor you wear, with heavier armor suggesting more dire effects. Critical tables are tied to the class or creature type, as well as the level for most classes, and can be absolutely brutal at high levels, including maiming and instant death style effects. There's rules for mounted combat, which are pretty straightforward, but then an entire section is given for deeds of arms, which warriors accomplish, as I said before, with the deed die. While none of these are really considered hard rules, the tables do give a fairly robust start to draw inspiration from, and you could actually probably play a lot of the game with just the sample tables included. There's a section on damage and health, of course, healing and saving throws, etc., pretty standard stuff, although there is a last-ditch save mechanic for killed characters, wherein if the group recovers the body, there's actually a chance that the character in question was just unconscious and not truly dead, although they may end up with some really debilitating penalties regardless. Other combat rules are given, of course. So you've got morale, which actually helps you determine whether creatures are going to stay and fight or not. You've got 2-weapon fighting, turning the unholy, which is similar to turning undead. And then spell duels have their own entire section that can result in complex spell interactions and possible catastrophic events, should the casters be too evenly matched. Indeed, magic in general in this system is seriously unpredictable and can be very dangerous. In fact, Chapter 5 goes into the magic in detail and is one of the largest chapters. It includes rules for spell burn, which allows wizards to sacrifice their ability scores to boost a particular spell, as well as the rules for spell checks. In DCC RPG, every single time you cast a spell, you roll against a table. For clerics, failure can end up with their gods eventually becoming displeased with them and ignoring them, while wizards may actually begin to warp and harm themselves with exposure to the arcane magics. Even on a success, the actual spell effect can vary drastically depending on the momentary outcome of your die. Some of these spells have dramatically different effects from casting to casting, and the whole system seems to be geared around unpredictability. There's even sub-methods for a wizard to obtain a patron, which is a supernatural entity that grants them their magic, that they can call on from time to time for help in extremely dire situations, but in return the patron slowly twists said character's magic to the entity's own ends. Like most books, the spell entry tables take up a huge amount of the book, although this time it's because some spells can have a few pages worth of tables associated with them, even though the actual number of spells in DCC RPG is pretty small. Some spells also reproduce elements that other systems consider non-spell effects, like obtaining specialization with a particular school of magic or creating items. Chapter 6 is another very short chapter, covering your basic campaigning rules, but is actually quite inspirational just because of the material it presents on actual medieval and low fantasy settings, which may be a new thing for people who are not versed in low fantasy gaming. Chapter 7 is the generic collection of judges' rules. GMs in this game are called judges, which I should have been calling them from the very beginning. Basically, there's some minor miscellany in there, but there's actually a lot of information involved on patrons and familiars and so forth for magic users. So there's actually a lot more minor magic rules in the Judges Rules chapter. There's some guidelines on experience points, as well as expected heroes of each level per capita, which can give you an indication of how many heroes of a particular level you should have in a particular city. There's finally some rules for luck regeneration in there for classes that don't automatically get it back. Chapter 8 covers magic items and magic item creation. Magic items in DCC RPG are very much custom affairs, so while there's some interesting tables and suggestions in there, most of it is just guidelines on creating your own custom items for your particular game. Likewise, Chapter 9 covers monsters, and while there's some pretty classic ones laid out there, they're just supposed to be used as examples for creating your own, according to your particular adventure's needs. One interesting thing in this chapter, though, are the various critical tables for different types of monsters, some of which are very thematic. One thing to note is that monsters are considered classic include some that are more suited to the strange and weird type of things rather than the classic fantasy gaming. So expect to see some creatures that might be more suited for sci-fi or science fantasy in there as well. The appendices are strangely specific. C is for curses, with examples of curses given. L is a list of languages. N is inspirational reading, similar to the AD&D Appendix N. In fact, I think it's just a restatement of that with some additional material. O is for other OSR resources, which were current as of this particular printing, but since most of them are on the internet, I'm not sure how useful that's going to be. P is a list of poisons. R just examines the rules based on complexity and is very short. S is a list of names for various types of creatures and persons. And T is basically a number of tables of titles for creatures and characters. The last section of the book is a pair of adventures, one for level 0s and one for levels 1 to 3, that give a very strong set of examples on how to create adventures for this system, and are pretty indispensable. Now, I've said over and over again how this book captures the theme and atmosphere of sword and sorcery fantasy, and the book itself states that it aims not for the original D&D feel like many OSR games, but rather for the literature that inspired the original D&D. And honestly, I think in that way, it does an excellent job. It's very well presented, pretty comprehensive without being overloaded with hard and specific rules, and it has a lot of groundwork in there for coming up with your own stuff based on the kind of theme that you want. As a player, if you're going to get into OSR, you're probably going to find this one about as easy to get into as a number of other ones out there, although from what I've seen, even the more well-balanced adventures are probably going to be pretty deadly for you. So get used to seeing things go bad real fast. If you're a wizard or other spellcaster, this goes down double, because the entire magic system seems to be designed to cut down on the whole caster supremacy of later gaming, just by royally screwing over casters if they make the wrong choices. Still, if you're willing to roll the dice, so to speak, you can come out with a very interesting and powerful wizard. In general, even though you can get into this one as a new RPG player in general, I would really recommend cutting your teeth on some other system before diving into this one. As a GM, or judge in this game is not for the new judge. If you have never run a game before and are interested in the OSR movement, do yourself a favor and play some other system first. Get used to every aspect of running a game and a campaign before you come back to this one, because this is not a beginner's RPG, especially for the person running it. This is designed for experienced GMs that have a lot of things to draw on in terms of interpreting rules and coming up with new ones. The sheer amount of stuff left open to GM interpretation can be positively overwhelming if you're not used to it. Once you've got that experience under your belt, however, I would say that you can get quite a bit out of this book and the system therein. I think the most important thing about this system is how it manages to present an OSR feel without being a retro clone. It's a setup which I've only seen pulled off well a few other times, and honestly, it's invigorating to be able to play a game that's so well invested with the old sword and sorcery feel, and yet not be just another iteration of what I've seen before. Something that's close enough to be recognizable but will keep the players guessing, especially if they've got a lot of experience with actual D&D. It has its downsides, of course. Many other OSR games are much more streamlined than this one, and the fact that it's geared towards a more experienced group may put some people off. The work required to produce an adventure is a momentary roadblock and needs to be taken into consideration. It's not something you can just slap an adventure together for. But if you get past that, I honestly think it can be really fun for quite a few different types of playstyles. But you really do have to be committed to running it and committed to playing it. If you like the feel of the mechanics, there is a Mutant Crawl Classics game by Goodman Games that is going to be released in August of 2017. It'll be compatible with this one, but focused more on a post-apocalyptic sci-fi sort of game, so keep an eye out for that, and I may do a review on that if I decide to get it. I think I'm going to leave this review at that. This has been the RPG Crawler with Dungeon Crawl Classics RPG. If you like what you've seen, remember to leave a like, comment if you've got feedback, and subscribe for more RPG content, both tabletop and computer related. If you're feeling particularly generous and want to support my channel, please check out my Patreon at patreon.com/rpgcrawler or through the links in the description below. Until next time, take care and goodbye.